Is the commission ready to proceed, Mr. Rosatos?
Yes, we are. Sorry for the delay.
No problem. Ms. Apodaca, are we back on the record? We have a court reporter.
We're on the record.
All right, thank you. So let's see, it's Mr. Moander versus Mr. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing.
That's what I'm talking about. Let's go.
That's one way of putting it.
I see you lift weights.
The OCD doesn't have any questions for this individual, so I'll pass the witness. Mr. Hearing Officer, thank you, though.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick it up then with Mr. Beck for Rice Operating.
No questions.
And either Mr. Suazo or Mr. Parrott for Pilot. Or anyone for Pilot. Going once, going twice. Pilot, are you out there? All right, well, nobody for Pilot, so then let's, who wishes to start for the commission? Dr. Rampoma?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bailey, for your testimony today. Can we bring up one of your slides and I'll check that. I think that is going to be K3, if we can bring it up. I want to know the sensitivity analysis. You talked about, you did sensitivity analysis on the net pay. So I want to know, I want you to explain more about the processes that went into that sensitivity analysis.
Yeah. So when Scott was running, Mr. Burkhead was running his petrophysical model, we had sensitivities for a low and high case on the water saturation. Okay. And so we have two separate things that we're doing here with the cementation and the saturation exponents that are part of Archie's equation. And so, I'm sorry, were you gonna?
No, go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay. And so we varied the M throughout the section. The cementation exponent is varied through the San Andreas, the upper and lower San Andreas. But on both cases, that variation stays the same. The only thing that changes is the actual saturation exponent N. And so that is varied through the San Andreas. So that is what gives us a varying oil saturation that you see on track 5. Okay, so that's why we have a high case and a base case is what I'll call it, or a low case.
Okay, let's look at this, the Archie's equation. You said what was changing was N.
Yes, N is varied, is different in the high case versus the low case.
So then can you give me the values for the high and then the low?
Well, I think the variation of N on the high case is actually an algorithm that Mr. Burkhead used. So that's probably a better question for Mr. Burkhead, who will be up next.
Okay, I appreciate that. So essentially, it was the changes in the saturation that was mostly utilized in terms of the sensitivity analysis, and that automatically impacted the net pay too.
Yeah, so that impacts the net pay because of the water saturation cutoff itself, right? So the water saturation cutoff that was used to determine the net pay determines the amount of net pay, which is why we provide a low and a high case on every map within the exhibits.
Okay. Let's look at this log once again. You know, I'm a little bit not sure why you picked the Lovington right at where you pick it. Why is that not the base of the San Andreas? Or, yeah, the top of the San Andreas. Just look at the gamma ray log and then explain to the commission why you believe that the top has to be where it is compared to, let's say, where you pick the top of the Lovington.
Yeah, so the Lovington sand has been identified in outcrop and tied to subsurface across multiple fields. And so Dr. Lindsay identified the Lovington sand within the 679 core as well as the Bell core. Okay, so we understand that the Lovington sand sits within the middle of the upper San Andreas. It splits the upper San Andreas, okay? And so the upper part that you see, the next sequence up that you see, where we have a tight neutron density signature, and I don't have a pointer here, but you can see in track 3, I'll call it track 3, we leave the depth track out, but you can see how tight that gets at the top. That's a diagnostic signature across the field for the top of the San Andreas and how it is correlated.
But there's no changes in the PE.
No, well, there is some subtle changes in the PE. You just can't see them. The lines are through. But in general, you're looking at similar stratigraphy. Yes, you see the similar PE all the way down through the lower San Andreas as well. It's because we're dealing with dolomites in general, or dolomitized sands, that give a similar PE representation. Okay.
So on this particular log, are you saying that you use the core to help you identify the Lovington, or it was strictly based on the gamma ray log?
No, the core was used to identify the Lovington and the top of the San Andreas.
Now, on this particular log, would you more or less deny or more or less confirm or disagree that if anybody doesn't have a core, probably they're going to put the base of the San Andreas right at the top of the San Andreas where you pick the Lovington sand?
No, I am not.
Okay, thank you. And what is the calibration for this particular well?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The calibration depth, because you are showing me subsea and
Oh, but the measured depth?
Yeah.
I would have to go back to my database. I show everything in subsea. I apologize.
Okay. And I presume you are not able to tell me what the RW is for, let's say, this estimation, right?
What the RWU?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you mean the actual RW we used?
Yes.
I believe that I'm not going to speculate on that. Scott will answer that directly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can we go to K2? Exhibit K2. Oh, you passed by that. The next one. Yes, K2, if you can move it up a little bit so we can see the map. Up again. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So the yellow location is showing Empire's SWD. Can you tell the commission where it's completed?
The SWD?
Yes.
I believe that there are perfs within the San Andreas, possibly deeper as well.
Okay, in the San Andreas. Is Empire going to shut that well down? Do you know or no?
I wouldn't be able to say what Empire is going to do with that well.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that, or let me put it this way, has there been any analysis on this particular well, whether it has impacted production in the Greenback that you know of?
I'm not aware of that. No, sir.
Okay. And Empire definitely owns that well. And do you know when that well was drilled?
I don't know the exact date of when that well was drilled, but it was previous to Empire's acquisition of this asset.
Okay. So based on your geological analysis, would you say that that well, I mean the Empire SWD well, is completed in the same formation as Goodnight's SWD wells?
I would say it's probably in similar zones. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have access to the Goodnight well information as part of your analysis that you did?
Do I have a sense of what information? I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm asking, that you've shown all the wells that you have in this area. But I'm asking if you had data from Goodnight well, the existing SWDs as part, or did you include that as part of your analysis?
Yes, several of the wells. So all the wells that you see with a green star on them were used in the analysis. Some of these we don't have logs for, but most of them we do. So quite a few of them.
So, we started with K3 and then we pointed out some of the discrepancies that could be in terms of picking the tops. I mean, if you pick up 3 geologists in the room, probably everybody's going to give you a different top. So I'm asking you, who has the final authority, in terms of deciding which top is the best top?
You-
Let me rephrase my question. So I'm asking that there are a lot of uncertainties associated with the tops that has been picked. And we went through one of them. Well, let's say if I don't have a core, I'm just going to pick where you pick the top as a Lovington as the top of the San Andreas. But you have a core, so clearly you were able to more or less discern through that. So with all these uncertainties associated with the tops here and there, my question is, do you know who has the final authority in terms of the final tops that can be adopted by the commission?
I would expect that you would adopt our tops as the top of the San Andreas.
So you have authority. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying I have the authority, but I mean, we have literature to back it up. We have core data to back it up, and we've correlated it across the field. I don't know how the Lovington Sand sits in the middle of the San Andreas. It's not the top of the San Andreas. So I'm kind of confused on why you're determining to put the top at the top of the Lovington Sand.
Okay. Are you aware of New Mexico Geological Bureau of Geology?
Yes, sir.
So was there any discussion as part of your work, any discussion with the New Mexico Bureau of Geology with regards to discussions on the tops picked?
We did not have a discussion with them, but they have reported tops in several wells that we can actually, we'll show you as well.
So how does your top picks compare to that of the Bureau of Geology's picks?
Well, it's funny enough. Sometimes they're deeper, sometimes they're right on, sometimes they're shallower. So it's very inconsistent within the OCD as well.
Well, so are you saying that OCD picks and then the Bureau of Geology picks are sometimes different?
Oh, yes, 100%. And I'll show you that.
Okay. So that establishes the uncertainty associated with the picks of the tops. Now, as a commissioner, and as I'm looking through all these uncertainties associated with this, are you saying that your tops that you've picked more or less supersedes all the other tops?
I'm telling you that our top is consistent with the geology and the literature and the experts that have studied the field for 40 plus years. We have core data to support it. I would suggest that our tops are consistent, much more consistent than either the OCDs or Goodnights.
Thank you. Okay. There was another one well that was showed as well that that had the same issue with regards to the tops. So yeah, it's a little bit confusing, we're trying to figure out what is the best solution here. So it's more challenging. But let me move on here. Now, you showed in your saturation. So if we can go to K3, and it's the same for, let's use K3 for instance. You're saying that each bar is more like 20%?
Each grid line is 20%.
Yeah, okay. Now, I mean, I'm still trying to figure out, based on the cross-examination of Mr. Rankin, he showed you one well. That is a water-producing well that goes through the San Andreas. You have a lot of experience in our oil business. tell the commission how, let's say, a saturation of about 40%, 50%, there will never be an oil production, through that well.
That it would, are you asking why the oil wouldn't be mobile?
Yes, at least why would there not be even a single amount of oil produced through that water well that was completed in the San Andres, assuming, he went through that with you, you showed more like you have a percentage is more like 50, 60. So how is it possible that no single, each of these was tested oil production?
I'm uncertain on where the exact perfs would be in those wells, number one. Number two, this is all residual oil. I don't know that the water supply wells themselves don't have skim in the tanks. I don't think any of us were there to see that, whether it's reported or not, whether there's a sheen, there was some possibility of some oil that was sitting on the tanks. I don't know that answer.
And probably the petrophysicists will help me here on this one, but let me put it on record anyways. We do know, and you talked about you do not know the mobile oil here.
That's correct.
So do you know if the petrophysicists will know about that?
I think he might give some better indication of what might be the mobile oil, but I can't speak for him.
Okay. There are calls you showed, as we went through series of the logs. It sounds like there were calls from MSSU 329 457 458 461. Why were these calls not analyzed, especially for fractures?
You mean the wells that were cored in the Grayburg?
I think some of them were in the Greenberg. Others two was in the San Andres, all over the place. So
The only wells we had access to were the RR Bell and the 679. So any core that was in the Grayburg, specifically in the Grayburg, we did not analyze. Our focus was on the San Andres.
So is it your testimony that none of these other wells that I mentioned go through the San Andres?
The wells that you just mentioned, I'm have to go back and look at the cross section, but I assume that all those go through the San Andres. Yes, we do not have core other than the RR Bell and the 679.
So you do not have, though there are core, but you did not have access to.
That's correct.
Okay,
Yes.
got you. Okay. Okay. Now, XTO sold the EMSU their interest in that to Empire. Now, my question to you is that, you talked about how some of the SWDs could impact, the injection could impact, let's say, the upper layer, which is the upper formation, which is the Greenberg. You talked about that.
It could.
It could. Okay. So why did XTO not oppose to any of the existing saltwater injection in this area? And even Empire went ahead and still drilled, or more or less, whether it was XTO, they still have SWD that goes into the San Andres.
That would be a question for XTO. I don't know the answer to what their thinking was on that.
Do you really believe in all these high saturations that you are picking in non-conventional reservoir?
All our saturations, specifically on the RR Bell and the 679, are tied to the core. So we have core saturations. Those saturations are tied to the core. So the model is built off of that for every other well. So all the saturations that we have here, especially on the low side, that is the base case. That is tied to the core properties, the core oil saturations that were measured.
Well, now, so is it your testimony that, let's say, K3, exhibit K3, K4, 100% matches the core saturations that were shown to us yesterday?
Down through the core interval, yes, sir. It's Very consistent, yes. I'm not going to say every single dot on the core matches, but it's very consistent, and Mr. Burkhead's going to go through that.
But you told me then why do we have high and lows here in the saturation estimation?
Because this is a conventional core. We know that conventional core is probably the likely lowest oil saturation we would see. If we had done pressure or sponge core, we may have higher values, as Mr. Lindsay had testified to yesterday.
You know, is there a well-documented reference that substantiate the potential changes in the different types of the saturation measurements?
I think he used an example out of Seminole Field. I don't believe any of these wells in the EMSU have been sponge or pressure cored.
But there is no reference. Is there any documented, I mean, any published material on this subject to establish that?
Yes, I think Mr. Burkhead's going to go through that.
I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And are you saying that there's going to be a testimony where we do have where the actual core measurements are correlated to your log measurements?
Yes, sir.
Right.
He's going to show the petrophysical plots and all his interpretations. So you'll be able to see the core values as porosity and permeability and oil saturations or water saturations.
So in your estimation of the oil in place, what parameter was the most uncertain?
I mean, all of it kind of is, if you're being honest. I mean, there's a range of possibilities when you're dealing with reservoirs like this. I think that, that's why we provided a range of probabilities or possibilities, if you will. We wanted to show what we thought that the low side could be and the high side could be. We don't see everything in black and white. And so that's why you have the low cases and the high cases, because we're showing you a range of possibilities of what could be there.
Yeah, and you showed us, these higher numbers that you have in your testimony, which will be K55. Yeah, you showed us that. And my question to you is, why is this not conventional play?
Well, it's because it's got significant water and it's below the oil water contact. So when this field was being drilled, they were staying above the oil water contact in conventional wisdom, as you would. When you're drilling conventional wells, you're not trying to drill below the oil water contact. What's left is a residual oil zone, and that's what's being targeted all around these fields that I have shown. The EOR efforts that are being done to date within the San Andres is because they're all residual oil zones. They weren't targeted as a conventional primary pay.
Okay, then what is the wettability here in the San Andres, in this EMSU?
I think that's a question that Scott will be able to answer for you.
So there's been a mention of the Seminole Field, Tarcotin, Goldsmith sites. Can you tell the commission what kind of numbers in terms of the oil in place that do we have in these analogous fields that we are talking about here today?
The oil in place numbers for the other fields?
Yeah, if you can.
I didn't evaluate the other fields personally, so I don't have the numbers for those. I haven't done the study on those fields.
And they are not in the literature?
They may be, but I didn't look for specific numbers. All I was trying to illustrate is that there are several EOR projects going on in these fields.
So then these numbers that has been calculated as oil in place, was it compared to any other play within the Permian?
My evaluation was strictly for the EMSU.
Now, based on your limited experience, as you went back and forth in ROZs, prospecting, so how did you do the quality checks, on your results? How did you do that?
The petrophysical modeling and the log analysis itself is consistent no matter what reservoir you're looking at.
You don't believe that the ROZ is more complex and cannot necessarily be treated as a conventional reservoir?
I think when you have core data to calibrate your petrophysical models to, that you've got a pretty good process to be able to model the rest of the wells in the field.
Okay. Now, there was a discussion about, the paper that was published in 1996 by Stickland et al. I hope I got the name right. And the discussion, as we all read, it is more like the production, or let's say the migration of the water from the San Andres was not through the formation. At least that is what I read. And they are saying that it's through the wellbore. I mean, how do you explain this if you have any knowledge as a geologist?
I don't know how to explain sulfate-bearing waters getting into the Grayberg when the Grayberg doesn't have sulfate-bearing waters. So my presumption is, if you ask me on a common sense basis, that as the Grayberg main pay zone was being produced, you're reducing pressure within the Grayberg, which naturally fluids are going to find their way to the lowest pressure zone. So given the amount of fractures that we saw in core, the likelihood of fracturing up on the structures themselves, that we have some migration of the fluids into the Grayberg. I really don't see how any other way it could have gotten there. That's my point, I guess.
Okay. Okay, we've talked about this one. I still want to talk a little bit about that EMSU 457 and then 458 well. So I don't know if you can bring it up. Got the answer. 457 and then 458. Okay.
Probably K10, 11, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I should have put the key number there. I don't have it.
It's in the cross section.
Yeah, it should be multiple logs, I think, that are being compared.
It was used for the stratigraphic correlations. It's in the cross sections.
Yeah, so probably let's do 14. Yeah, let's do K14. Yeah, so in K14, we do have EMSU 628 well. I'm asking you the same on record though. You have the Lavington sand, where you picked it, where you picked the Lavington sand. I mean, if you look at the gamma ray log on the track 1, why should it not be where the San Andres is? Just looking at, I mean, this one, there's no core. So just looking at the gamma ray log signature, I'm still trying to figure that one out. So,
Doctor, you could correlate the tops across the field, and that's where the top sits, and it's always above the Lovington sand. You need to always remember the Lovington sand sits in the middle of the upper San Andres. It splits it. And so you can't have the top of San Andres at the Lovington sand. Okay? We know that. We know it from literature. We know it from the core data. I mean, that the top of San Andres sits above the Lovington sand. That is why the top is where it is. And it's correlated back to the core wells, 679 and the RR Bell.
guess I'm going to ask OCD about that. Thank you.
It'll be perfect for our redirect, yeah.
So the water wells, and I think the 457 and then the 458 are all water wells. So if we can get that one, I think that one should be
K12, I think.
K12. No, that should be K10.
K10, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so K10, again. So let's just pick one of them. These are water wells. So let's pick, let's say 457. And in there, let's say the petrophysics is showing saturation in excess of like 50%, 40%, 50%. As part of the analysis that you did you review the well records for these wells?
I didn't review any well records for those wells, no, sir.
So as part of the petrophysics that was done, was there a review of the well records?
No, the petrophysics was modeled off the core wells.
The petrophysics was modeled.
Petrophysics were modeled off the 2 core wells we have. Those are the only core data, physical rock data we have to calibrate to. That is extrapolated into the well logs for all the other wells that don't have core.
But here you've done petrophysical analysis right here.
What do you mean? Yes, we have petrophysical analysis that's extrapolated to the other wells based on the core wells.
So are you telling the commission that, let's say you did not utilize the software to interpret these logs to get, let's say, the saturations, the net to pay, the net gross and all of that you're showing here, there was no analysis done?
No, we have the raw logs. We didn't create these logs. We have the logs when they were logged. Okay. All I'm telling you is that our petrophysics, so the saturations you're seeing, the porosity you see is not changed. That's the dolomite porosity. Okay. The resistivity is what it is. The PE curve is what it is. The only thing that's changed here is the low and high saturations that you're seeing in there.
Do you know if there is any relative PAM that has been done on any of these calls?
I know that there are permeability measurements. Yes.
No, I mean relative PAM.
That's going to be a question for Scott. I believe there has, but those are there's definitely perm measurements.
Yeah. Okay. Because I want to know the critical oil saturation for the San Andreas, at least in the EMSU. And then even I want to know what the residual oil saturation to water injection in the Greenberg, how much is it? So that is going to help us a lot, in terms of being able to ascertain these saturations. And, you talked about these saturations are based on the core, but, if you were here yesterday, based on Dr. Lindsay's testimony, you do have a core where the saturation of the water and the saturation of the oil doesn't sum up to 1. And I asked about where that difference is.
That's probably air.
Then
you're exposing water, you're exposing gas, you're exposing oil out of the core. You're likely never going to get to 1 on any core you take.
Yeah, let me not get into that more, because when you say that, let's say the remaining saturation can be, let's say, air, I don't think that was factored when you try to do the correlation of the well log information to that of the core. But I get what you mean, so I'm not going to really go that far. So is it your testimony that the core data was the one that more or less utilized for the quality checks on the estimations that were made, especially for the saturations?
Yes. So all the wells are core. The 2 core wells we have are core calibrated. All the wells are quality checked based off that core calibration. That is the endpoints for the petrophysical model.
There was a discussion about the BO. And since you presented it, you worked on it. I mean, you used it in estimating your oil in place calculation. Do you know the source of that?
That source is from Empire's engineer.
Were there any variations in the uncertainty that was calculated for, let's say, for the high and then the low for the BO?
No, I use the same BO for both.
So then let me repeat my question earlier on and ask you, if you look at the 7758AH phi 1 minus SW over the BO, which of these parameters is more uncertain?
Well, I think that, like I said, through the chord interval, I think we're confident with based on the core measurements. Now, where we get into wells or in the lower St. Andrews where we don't have core, obviously there's going to be some uncertainty with that because we don't have physical rock to tie it to. So our model is just carried on down based on the core data all the way through the St. Andrews. We did not alter it in any way.
In your exhibit K3, you talked about the DT, that's the sonic log. I heard you said that there is some inconsistency with the sonic log, so you did not use that in calculating your porosities.
I said that we don't typically use sonic logs based on themselves to generate sonic porosities because there can be inconsistencies with them. We would have to model that porosity based on the sonic log. It's not that we can't do it. It's just not as good as a density log. And in that case of that well, we didn't have a neutron log anyway. So we would not have done the petrophysical analysis on that well.
Okay. Let's talk about the oil in place calculation for a moment. So if you look at those values that was in your testimony, and that will be K55. So did you perform any, like, let me just put it this way. What is the uncertainty associated with these calculations?
I mean, I can't quantify what the uncertainty would be. All I'm telling you is we put a low case and a high case based on our model, and that's our range of possibilities.
Now, but so when I ask you about, let's say, what is the standard deviation from assuming you have 190, you have 331 in the lower San Andreas, you have 438.76 low and then 718. So I'm asking you, what is the uncertainty associated with this? You should be able to quantify that. Right?
I would suggest that our range of possibilities is quantifying the possibility or uncertainty, as you call it.
So with more or less the average between them will be more like your mean?
I think that our total is a low side case for our model, and the high case, as you can see on the right. I mean, that's why we're providing the sensitivities to give you a low case based on the model.
No, this is not a sensitivity. I mean, you said that there is a way that you calculated the low, and then there is a way that you calculated the high. If you're talking about uncertainty, then I wanted to see expectation curve. That shows all the statistical analysis to show us even where the P50 is, because this has a lot of uncertainty in terms of your standard deviation.
Okay, I do not have any curves to show you on uncertainty analysis, but I would argue that our base case is consistent with the core data. So at our base case, our low case is the core data saturations. The high case is corrected based on using a sponge core or a pressure core. What would the percentage be of increase? And so when you say that there's no sensitivities done, I guess I would argue that us providing a low and high case instead of a black and white case of what could be there, we're at least providing a range of possibilities of what we think there. So you can look at it as a range of possibilities. You can look at it as potential uncertainty of could it be this high or could it be this low?
Yeah, you made a great point. So you're saying that, let's say, and I know that Scott will get into this more, that your low case is based on the core.
That's correct.
Right?
That's the base case.
Now, and then you're saying that your high case is based on, let's say, assuming you are using a sponge or let's say some other way of calculating the saturation. How are you able to quantify that?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Out of the Seminole field, there's the published data of the increase with a sponge core from 18% to 24% to a pressure core of 32%. And so you could take that range there, and you can use that to say, okay, our potential oil saturations could be higher in this core. We believe we've expulsed oil out of it. So if we provide that range, if we had done a sponge core or a pressure core, then our possibility of our volumes could be much higher than what we're seeing based on those oil saturations. So
you
to me,
said
that is providing you with a sensitivity of potential oil volumes within the reservoir.
I mean, when you talk about, let's say, sensitivity, we all do know that in petroleum, we do have a way to report our oil in place, and that is the one I'm talking about. I mean, and I've forgotten that paper. I know we have the same, we're trying to do the same for CO2. Steve, I don't know if you remember that one. I mean, that document that talks about how we more or less assign uncertainty with regards to our risk